Black little girl playing the violin, but she never expected a passerby to do this, a gesture that completely changed her life. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The cold wind of Vermont howled through the dense forest that bordered the small town of Maple Haven. The sound of distant car horns mixed with the rustling leaves, creating an eerie symphony. It was amidst this unsettling backdrop that the local police stumbled upon two children, a girl, barely 10 years old, and a frail boy clutching her hand. Their clothes were tattered, their faces streaked with dirt, and their eyes held the kind of fear only tragedy could leave behind. The girl, Amelia, had her arm protectively around her younger brother, Elliot, as though shielding him from an invisible danger. Clutched in her other hand was a worn black violin case. The officer crouched to their level, speaking softly, but Amelia flinched at his every word. It wasn't until the officer promised to help her brother that she reluctantly agreed to go with them. A week later, Amelia and Elliot found themselves standing at the gates of Maple Haven Orphanage, a large, weathered building that loomed over the surrounding fields like a sentinel of broken dreams. The head mistress, Mrs. Caldwell, greeted them with forced warmth, her keen eyes assessing the new arrivals. Elliot, only 4, clung to Amelia's skirt, his small frame trembling. He was pale, with sunken cheeks and wide, teary eyes that seemed to plead for reassurance. For him, Amelia was the only anchor in a world that had been uprooted too many times. Amelia, on the other hand, stood tall, her expression unreadable. But inside, her mind churned with fragmented memories. A grand house filled with vibrant paintings, the scent of wood polish mingling with faint strains of piano music, and a comforting voice humming a lullaby. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, the faces of her parents remained elusive, blurred as if hidden behind a veil. The violin case was the only piece of their past that remained intact. The staff at Maple Haven had tried to pry it from her hands, but Amelia clutched it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It's just an old violin, dear," said one of the staff members, but Amelia's piercing glare silenced further attempts. Each night, after ensuring Elliot was asleep in the shared dormitory, Amelia would open the case in secret. The violin inside was far from pristine. Its wood was scuffed, its strings worn. Yet, as her fingers traced its curves, a strange sense of calm washed over her. It was as though the instrument held pieces of a life she couldn't quite remember but desperately wanted to. Elliot, despite his fragile condition, found solace in his sister's presence. He would often crawl into her bunk at night, his small arms wrapped around her, as though fearing she might disappear too. Amelia, though weary, would stroke his hair and hum softly, her voice carrying a melody she herself couldn't place. Life at Maple Haven was far from idyllic. The orphanage was overcrowded, underfunded, and filled with children bearing their own scars. Amelia kept to herself, wary of forming bonds she might have to break. But she couldn't help noticing how Elliot struggled. The other children often teased him for his quiet nature, calling him names and shoving him in the corridors. One rainy afternoon, as Amelia sat by the window in the common room, staring at the storm outside, a group of older boys approached. "Is that all you brought with you?" One sneered, pointing to the violin case at her feet. "What's so special about it?" "It's mine," Amelia replied coolly, keeping her gaze on the rain. "Looks like junk to me," another boy taunted, stepping closer. "Maybe we should see if it even works." Before she could react, the boy lunged for the case. Amelia sprang to her feet, her eyes blazing. "Touch it, and you'll regret it," she warned, her voice low but firm. The group hesitated, unnerved by the intensity in her tone. "She's crazy," one muttered, and they retreated, but not without throwing a few mocking laughs over their shoulders. That night, Amelia sat on her bunk, the violin cradled in her lap. She plucked the strings softly, testing their tension, her mind drifting. She thought of Elliot, fast asleep in the bunk below, and the weight of responsibility she carried. She didn't know how they had ended up in that forest, or why no one had come looking for them. All she knew was that she couldn't fail her brother. He was all she had left. As the moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the worn wood of the violin, Amelia whispered to herself, "I'll keep us safe, no matter what it takes." The days at Maple Haven fell into a predictable rhythm: morning chores, school lessons in the makeshift classroom, lunch in the noisy dining hall, and afternoons spent outdoors or in the common areas. For most of the children, life blurred into monotonous sameness, but not for Amelia. Her world revolved around a single constant: the worn black violin case she kept by her side like a precious treasure. One crisp autumn morning, while the other children played kickball in the field, Amelia found herself drawn to the orphanage's old chapel. It was a small, unused building, its dusty pews and stained glass windows long forgotten. The moment she stepped inside, a wave of calm swept over her. It was quiet here, far removed from the chaos of the orphanage. Amelia gently placed the violin case on the altar and opened it. She pulled out the violin, its strings dull from disuse. Taking a deep breath, she rested the bow against the strings and drew it slowly across, producing a hauntingly beautiful note that resonated through the empty space. For a moment, Amelia froze, startled by the clarity of the sound. She couldn't remember who had taught her to play, but her hands moved instinctively, as though the violin was an extension of her body. She closed her eyes and allowed the music to flow. Soft, melancholic notes filled the chapel, weaving a melody that spoke of loss, hope, and resilience. Outside, Mrs. Caldwell, the headmistress, was walking past the chapel when the sound reached her ears. She stopped abruptly, tilting her head as if to confirm what she was hearing. Her curiosity piqued. She opened the chapel doors and peeked inside. There she saw Amelia standing at the altar, her small frame almost dwarfed by the vastness of the space, her eyes closed as she played with an intensity far beyond her years. Mrs. Caldwell's stern expression softened as she listened. The melody was raw and emotional, tugging at something deep within her. She waited until the final note faded before stepping forward. "That was remarkable," Mrs. Caldwell said, startling Amelia, who quickly tucked the violin behind her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Amelia hesitated, her grip tightening on the violin. "I don't remember," she admitted softly, her gaze fixed on the floor. The headmistress studied her for a moment before nodding. "Well, keep practicing. You've been given a gift, Amelia. Don't let it go to waste." Word of Amelia's talent spread quickly among the staff. The children, however, were less impressed. One afternoon in the common room, while Amelia was quietly tuning her violin, a group of older girls approached. "Think you're special because you can play a little music?" one sneered, her hands on her hips. "I don't think I'm special," Amelia replied calmly, not looking up. "Well, you're not," the girl snapped. "Nobody here is. We're just orphans, and nobody cares about us." Amelia said nothing, focusing on her violin. But the girls weren't done. "What's so great about that old thing anyway?" another one jeered, pointing to the violin. "It looks like it belongs in the trash." Before Amelia could respond, a boy named Max snatched the violin from her hands. "Let's see how well it plays when it's broken," he taunted, raising it above his head. "No!" Amelia shouted, lunging forward. Her sudden outburst caught everyone off guard. She grabbed Max's arm with surprising strength, her eyes blazing with fury. "Give it back!" For a moment, Max froze, stunned by the intensity in her voice. Then, with a nervous laugh, he handed the violin back. "Fine. Keep your stupid violin." That night, as Amelia sat on her bunk, she replayed the incident in her mind. She hated that she had lost her temper, but the thought of losing the violin filled her with a dread she couldn't explain. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a piece of her past, a link to the parents she barely remembered. Elliot climbed up into her bunk, clutching his threadbare teddy bear. "Are you mad?" he asked in his small voice. "No," Amelia said, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired." "Do you think they'll ever come back?" Elliot whispered, his wide eyes searching hers. "Who?" Amelia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Mom and Dad." Amelia's chest tightened. She wanted to give him hope, but she couldn't lie. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I'm here, okay? I'll always take care of you." Elliot nodded and snuggled against her. As his breathing evened out, Amelia stared at the violin case beside her bed. She didn't know where their journey would lead, but one thing was clear. She would fight to protect what little they had left. The chilly air of early winter swept through the halls of Maple Haven Orphanage, carrying with it the echoes of children's laughter and footsteps. While the other children bustled about, Elliot spent most of his time by Amelia's side, quietly observing the world around him. Despite his fragile demeanor, there was a spark of curiosity in his wide eyes, a spark that often led him to trouble. It started in the boys' dormitory. Elliot, always shy, had trouble fitting in with the more boisterous boys his age. One boy in particular, Toby, made Elliot the target of his relentless teasing. Toby, with his gangly limbs and unruly hair, seemed to thrive on making others feel small. "Hey, baby boy," Toby jeered one afternoon as Elliot sat quietly on his bed, flipping through a picture book. "Still need your sister to fight your battles?" Elliot ignored him, keeping his eyes on the page, but Toby wasn't one to be dismissed so easily. "What's the matter? Too scared to talk?" When Elliot didn't respond, Toby grabbed the book from his hands. "Give it back!" Elliot protested, standing up. Toby grinned wickedly and dangled the book just out of reach. "Come and get it!" Elliot lunged, but Toby sidestepped easily, laughing. "Pathetic," he sneered, tossing the book onto a nearby bunk. "Go cry to your sister." Elliot's face flushed with humiliation. He wanted to stand up for himself, but his small frame and timid nature made him an easy target. Later that evening, Amelia noticed something was off. Elliot, usually talkative during their quiet moments, was unusually silent. He barely touched his dinner and avoided meeting her gaze. "What happened?" Amelia asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Nothing," Elliot muttered, poking at his food. "Elliot," Amelia pressed, leaning closer. "You can tell me." After a long pause, he whispered, "Toby took my book." Amelia's jaw tightened. She had seen Toby's antics before, but this time it was personal. "I'll talk to Mrs. Caldwell," she said, but Elliot shook his head vehemently. "No, that'll just make it worse." Amelia sighed, conflicted. She wanted to protect him, but she also knew he needed to learn to stand up for himself. "All right," she said finally, "but if he does it again, you tell me. Promise?" Elliot nodded, though the uncertainty in his eyes made her heart ache. The next morning, the orphanage buzzed with activity as the children prepared for outdoor chores. Elliot was assigned to clean the storage shed with Toby and a few others. Amelia didn't like the arrangement, but knew she couldn't always keep him by her side. Inside the shed, Toby wasted no time asserting his dominance. "You can take the broom, baby boy," he said, tossing it at Elliot. "Clean the corners while we do the real work." Elliot bit his lip but did as he was told, sweeping the dusty floor while the others moved crates and organized tools. He tried to stay out of their way, but it wasn't long before Toby found another opportunity to provoke him. As Elliot reached for a corner filled with cobwebs, Toby gave the broom a sharp kick, sending Elliot tumbling forward. His hands scraped against the rough floor as the other boys laughed. "Oops," Toby said mockingly. "Didn't see you there." Elliot scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment. But before he could respond, Toby leaned in close and hissed, "You don't belong here, you know. Nobody wants you." The words hit harder than any shove, and Elliot blinked back tears. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead. That evening, Elliot developed a fever. Amelia noticed his flushed cheeks and labored breathing as soon as he returned to their dormitory. "Elliot, you're burning up," she said, placing a hand on his forehead. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though his voice was weak. Amelia wasn't convinced. She helped him lie down and pulled the blanket up to his chin. "Rest," she said, her worry mounting. By morning, Elliot's condition had worsened. His fever was dangerously high, and he struggled to keep his eyes open. Amelia, frantic, rushed to Mrs. Caldwell's office. "He needs a doctor," Amelia pleaded. Mrs. Caldwell frowned, her expression troubled. "We don't have the funds for hospital care," she said. "I'll call Dr. Hart. He might be able to come by." Amelia's stomach churned. Dr. Hart was the local physician who occasionally volunteered at the orphanage, but his visits were sporadic at best. "That's not enough," she said, her voice trembling. "He's getting worse." "I'll do what I can," Mrs. Caldwell replied, but her tone lacked confidence. That night, as Elliot lay shivering under his blanket, Amelia sat by his side, clutching his hand. Her mind raced, searching for a solution. She couldn't lose him, not when he was all she had left. Her gaze drifted to the violin case by the bed. The idea struck her like a bolt of lightning. She remembered how the staff and children had reacted the last time they heard her play. Maybe, just maybe, her music could help. The next morning, Amelia approached Mrs. Caldwell with a bold proposal. "Let me perform," she said. "We can hold a fundraiser, something to bring in money for Elliot's care." Mrs. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "A fundraiser? And who's going to organize it?" "I'll do it," Amelia said firmly. "I'll play, and we'll ask the community to donate." The headmistress hesitated, but the determination in Amelia's eyes was undeniable. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we'll try it, but you'd better be ready." As plans for the fundraiser began to take shape, Amelia poured all her energy into practicing. Each note she played carried a silent prayer for her brother's recovery. She didn't know if her plan would work, but she refused to let doubt stop her. This was her chance to prove that music could heal, not just Elliot, but maybe even herself. The day of the fundraiser arrived, bringing with it an air of anticipation that buzzed throughout Maple Haven Orphanage. The children were excused from their usual chores to help prepare, decorating the main hall with paper streamers, hand-drawn posters, and mismatched chairs borrowed from every corner of the orphanage. It wasn't perfect, but it had charm, a reflection of the collective effort of everyone involved. For Amelia, the day felt like a pivotal moment. She had spent the past week pouring every ounce of her energy into practice, rehearsing late into the night in the small, echoing chapel. Each note she played carried the weight of her brother's fragile condition and her unwavering determination to help him. In the hours leading up to the performance, the orphanage staff hustled to set the stage. A makeshift platform had been constructed at one end of the hall, with an old upright piano placed to the side. Flyers had been distributed across the nearby town, and the staff hoped for a decent turnout. Amelia stood backstage, her violin case clutched tightly in her hands. She wore a simple but clean dress borrowed from one of the staff, and her usually unruly hair was neatly braided. Her heart raced as she peeked through the curtain at the growing audience. Townsfolk of all ages were filing in, chatting quietly as they took their seats. "Amelia!" Mrs. Caldwell's voice broke through her thoughts. The headmistress knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're going to do great. Just remember why you're doing this." Amelia nodded, her jaw set with determination. "For Elliot," she whispered. The hall quieted as Mrs. Caldwell stepped onto the stage to address the audience. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice calm and composed. "Thank you all for coming tonight to support our fundraiser. Every dollar raised will go toward helping one of our children, Elliot, who is in need of urgent medical care. Tonight, one of our very own, Amelia, will share her extraordinary talent with you." Applause filled the room as Amelia stepped onto the stage, her small figure illuminated by the dim glow of the overhead lights. She swallowed hard, gripping the violin tightly as she bowed to the audience. Taking her place at the center of the stage, she drew the bow across the strings, and the first note reverberated through the hall. The melody began softly, delicate as a whisper, drawing the audience in. Amelia closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. The notes carried a story, one of loss, resilience, and an unyielding love for her brother. It was a melody she didn't fully understand but felt in her soul, as though it had been etched into her very being. The room fell utterly silent, the audience transfixed by the raw emotion pouring from her violin. Even the youngest children, often restless and noisy, sat in wide-eyed awe. The old out-of-tune piano joined in for a brief interlude, played hesitantly by one of the staff members before Amelia took the lead again. Her music soared, filling every corner of the hall and leaving no heart untouched. Among the crowd sat a man dressed in a well-tailored coat, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. His name was Marcus Donovan, a name whispered in hushed tones among the adults who recognized him as a renowned composer. He had attended the fundraiser on a whim, drawn by the poster he had seen in town. Now, as he listened to Amelia's performance, his sharp gray eyes were filled with emotion. The melody she played was achingly familiar. It struck a chord deep within him, stirring memories he had long buried. Leaning forward in his seat, Marcus studied the girl intently. Her posture, her expressions, even the way she held the violin. It all reminded him of someone he had once known. But it was the music that held him captive. "Where did she learn that?" he muttered under his breath, but no one nearby had an answer. When the final note faded, the room erupted into applause. Amelia opened her eyes, startled by the intensity of the reaction. She took a deep bow, her cheeks flushed with relief and pride. "Bravo!" someone shouted, and others joined in with cheers and whistles. Mrs. Caldwell stepped back onto the stage, a broad smile on her face. "Thank you, Amelia, for that incredible performance," she said, "and thank you all for your generosity. Please enjoy the refreshments and feel free to donate at the collection table." As the crowd dispersed, Amelia returned backstage, her hands trembling slightly. She had done it. She had poured her heart into that performance, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Later, as Amelia sat with a cup of lukewarm tea in the staff lounge, Marcus approached her. He moved with a quiet confidence, his coat folded neatly over his arm. "That was a remarkable performance," he said, his deep voice startling her. "Thank you," Amelia replied softly, her eyes cautious. Marcus studied her for a moment before asking, "Where did you learn to play like that?" "I don't know," Amelia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just remember how it feels." He frowned slightly, as though her answer had only deepened his curiosity. "And the melody? Did someone teach it to you?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's just something I've always known." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You have a rare gift, Amelia," he said finally. "Don't lose it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Amelia with more questions than answers. She watched him disappear into the crowd, wondering why his words carried such weight. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Caldwell announced the fundraiser's total, enough to cover Elliot's medical treatment and more. Amelia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but her thoughts kept returning to the man in the coat. Who was he, and why did he seem so moved by her music? Unbeknownst to her, Marcus wasn't done. That performance had awakened something in him, a connection he couldn't ignore. The crisp morning air outside Maple Haven Orphanage carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Inside, the usual hum of activity filled the halls as children lined up for breakfast. Amelia sat at one of the long wooden tables, absent-mindedly stirring a bowl of oatmeal. Elliot, sitting beside her, looked much better. His fever had subsided after a few days of proper care, and a faint color had returned to his cheeks. "Eat," Amelia said gently, nudging the spoon toward him. He nodded and took a small bite, his eyes lighting up at the faint taste of honey Mrs. Caldwell had added as a treat. Amelia's relief at her brother's recovery was tempered by the lingering thoughts of the man who had approached her after the performance. There was something unsettling about the way he had spoken to her, as though he knew more than he let on. Later that morning, as Amelia helped clean the common room, Mrs. Caldwell entered with a purposeful stride. Her stern expression had softened into something resembling curiosity, and Amelia immediately noticed. "Amelia," Mrs. Caldwell said, motioning for her to follow. "There's someone here to see you." "Me?" Amelia asked, her brow furrowing. "Yes," Mrs. Caldwell replied, her tone careful. "He's waiting in my office." The walk to the office felt impossibly long. Amelia's mind raced with questions. Who could it be? Was it about her performance? Or, dare she hope, was it someone who knew her parents? When they arrived, Mrs. Caldwell opened the door, revealing Marcus Donovan, seated on the worn leather couch. His tailored coat and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to the shabby furnishings of the orphanage. "Good morning, Amelia," Marcus said, rising to his feet. His voice was deep but calm, carrying an air of authority. "Good morning," Amelia replied cautiously, stepping into the room. Mrs. Caldwell gestured for her to sit across from him before taking her place behind the desk. "Mr. Donovan has something he'd like to discuss with you," she said, her tone neutral but curious. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his sharp gray eyes studying Amelia intently. "I came to your performance the other night," he began. "Your music was extraordinary. Rarely have I heard such emotion and depth from someone so young." "Thank you," Amelia said softly, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze for long. "I don't believe in coincidences," Marcus continued. "The melody you played, it's one I haven't heard in years. It was written by someone very dear to me." Amelia's head shot up at this. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus hesitated, his expression briefly clouding with emotion. "Someone I knew long ago," he said vaguely. "Tell me, Amelia, do you remember where you learned it?" "No," she admitted. "I don't even know how I learned to play. It's just always been there." Marcus nodded slowly, as though her answer confirmed something he already suspected. "Amelia, I'd like to help you and your brother," he said after a moment. "You're clearly talented, and you deserve a chance to grow that talent." Mrs. Caldwell cleared her throat, her expression skeptical. "Mr. Donovan has expressed an interest in adopting you and Elliot," she said, her words measured. Amelia froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Adopt us?" she echoed, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "You're both remarkable children, and I believe you'd thrive in a home where you could pursue your passions." My home. Amelia glanced at Mrs. Caldwell, searching her face for guidance. The headmistress's expression remained unreadable. "We don't make decisions like this lightly, Mr. Donovan," she said. "I'll need to know more about your intentions." "Of course," Marcus said, his tone patient. "I'm happy to provide any information you need. I'm a composer by profession and have the means to provide for them both." Amelia's mind spun with questions. Why was he doing this? Why them? She couldn't deny the appeal of leaving the orphanage, of giving Elliot a chance at a better life. But there was also fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of trusting someone she barely knew. "Why us?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Marcus hesitated, a flicker of something, guilt, sadness, crossing his face. "Because I see potential in you," he said finally, "and because I feel a connection to your story." Amelia wasn't entirely convinced, but the sincerity in his voice gave her pause. She looked at Mrs. Caldwell, who sighed and folded her hands on the desk. "I'll need to conduct a thorough background check," she said. "If everything checks out, we can begin the process." For the next week, Amelia couldn't focus on anything else. The other children whispered about the man in the fancy coat who wanted to take her and Elliot away. Some were envious, others were skeptical. "What if he's a bad guy?" one girl whispered. "Rich people are always hiding something." Amelia brushed off the comments, focusing instead on Elliot. When she explained the situation to him, his eyes lit up with cautious hope. "We'll have our own room?" he asked. "Maybe," Amelia replied with a small smile, "but nothing's decided yet." By the end of the week, Mrs. Caldwell called Amelia and Elliot into her office. Marcus was there again, this time with papers and documents neatly arranged on the desk. "Everything checks out," Mrs. Caldwell said, her tone begrudgingly approving. "Mr. Donovan is prepared to proceed with the adoption." Amelia looked at Elliot, who nodded eagerly. Her heart pounded as she turned back to Marcus. "Okay," she said. "We'll go with you." A rare smile crossed Marcus's face. "You've made the right choice," he said warmly. "I promise, you won't regret it." As they packed their few belongings, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change in ways she couldn't predict. She glanced at the violin case sitting on her bed, its scratched surface reflecting the dim light. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. She would hold on to her music and her brother no matter what. The car ride from Maplehaven Orphanage to the Donovan estate was quiet. Amelia sat stiffly in the back seat, clutching Elliot's hand as the countryside blurred past the window. Marcus drove with practiced ease, his expression calm but unreadable. Beside him sat Mrs. Caldwell, who had insisted on accompanying them to ensure the children's transition went smoothly. "Are we almost there?" Elliot asked softly, his small voice breaking the silence. Marcus glanced at him in the rearview mirror and smiled faintly. "Not much longer now. You'll like it, I think. It's peaceful." Elliot nodded, but leaned closer to Amelia. She could feel the tension in his grip and squeezed his hand reassuringly. When they arrived, the Donovan estate loomed before them, a sprawling stone mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and towering oaks. The house had an air of quiet elegance, its gray facade softened by the warm afternoon sunlight. But to Amelia, it felt imposing, like a castle hiding secrets behind its grand facade. "This is it," Marcus said as he opened the car door for them. "Welcome to your new home." Amelia and Elliot stepped out, their eyes wide as they took in the grandeur of the estate. The front door opened, and a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile stepped out. "Hello there," she greeted. "I'm Martha, the housekeeper. You must be Amelia and Elliot." "Yes, ma'am," Amelia replied politely. Martha chuckled. "No need for formalities. Come on inside. I've got some snacks ready for you." The interior of the mansion was even more breathtaking. The foyer featured a grand staircase with an intricately carved banister, and the polished floors gleamed under the soft glow of a chandelier. As they followed Marcus through the house, Amelia couldn't help but notice the paintings on the walls. Landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces, each one more vibrant than the last. She paused briefly in front of a large canvas depicting a woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes. "That's one of my favorite pieces," Marcus said, noticing her interest. "Painted by a close friend of mine." Amelia nodded, her gaze lingering on the painting before she followed him into the living room. Elliot's awe turned to excitement when they were shown their rooms. His was bright and cheerful, with a window overlooking the garden and a small desk perfect for drawing. Amelia's room, on the other hand, was spacious and filled with light, with shelves lining one wall and a comfortable armchair by the window. But what caught her attention was the corner where a small stand waited, seemingly made for her violin. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, running her fingers along the wood. "I'm glad you like it," Marcus said from the doorway. "I thought you'd need a place to practice." Amelia glanced at him, her heart softening slightly. "Thank you." Not everything about their new life was easy, however. At dinner that evening, Amelia and Elliot met Marcus's son, Liam, a boy a few years older than Amelia. With his dark hair and sharp features, Liam had an air of confidence, or arrogance, that immediately set Amelia on edge. "So, you're the new additions," Liam said, leaning back in his chair. His tone was casual, but the way he eyed them made Amelia bristle. "Liam," Marcus warned, his voice firm. "What?" Liam said, shrugging. "I'm just making conversation." Elliot shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Amelia reached under the table to squeeze his hand. "It's nice to meet you," she said evenly, refusing to rise to Liam's bait. Liam smirked, but said nothing more, turning his attention back to his plate. The rest of the meal passed in strained silence, with Marcus occasionally trying to spark conversation, only for it to fizzle out. Over the next few days, Amelia began to explore the estate. The house was full of nooks and crannies, from the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves to the music room where a gleaming black grand piano sat waiting. The grounds were equally vast, with winding paths that led to a small pond and a greenhouse bursting with vibrant plants. Elliot seemed to adjust more quickly, spending hours sketching the flowers in the garden or following Martha around the house. But Amelia struggled to find her place. Liam's cold demeanor made her wary, and though Marcus was kind, he often seemed distracted, as though his thoughts were elsewhere. One afternoon, while exploring the library, Amelia came across a photograph tucked inside a book. It was old and faded, showing a young woman with a violin in her hands. Something about the image tugged at her memory, but when she tried to place it, her mind hit a wall. "What are you doing?" Liam's voice startled her, and she quickly closed the book. "Nothing," she said, turning to face him. "Just looking around." Liam leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "You think you're special, don't you?" Amelia frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You've been here less than a week, and already my dad's acting like you're the greatest thing to happen to this house," Liam said bitterly. "Just don't think you can replace—" He stopped abruptly, his expression darkening. "Replace who?" Amelia asked, but Liam had already turned and walked away. That night, as she lay in bed, Amelia replayed the day's events in her mind. She didn't understand Liam's hostility, but his words had planted a seed of doubt. What was her place in this house? And why did Marcus seem so invested in her and Elliot's future? As the house settled into silence, Amelia reached for her violin. She drew the bow across the strings, letting the music fill the room. It was a melody of longing, of questions unanswered, and memories just out of reach. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let anyone, or anything, take away the music that connected her to her past. The days at the Donovan estate settled into a rhythm. Amelia and Elliot slowly adjusted to their new surroundings, though the grandiosity of the house often left them feeling out of place. Amelia spent much of her time practicing her violin in the music room, drawn to the grand piano that seemed to hold a silent promise of answers. Elliot, meanwhile, flourished under Martha's watchful care, finding joy in sketching the gardens and exploring the estate's hidden corners. But despite the beauty of their new home, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the house held secrets, secrets tied to Marcus, and the way he often seemed to study her, as though searching for something he couldn't name. One rainy afternoon, Amelia found herself alone in the music room. She had been practicing a piece that came to her instinctively, the notes flowing through her fingers as if they had always been there. As she played, she became aware of Marcus standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You play beautifully," he said, stepping into the room. "Thank you," Amelia replied, setting the violin down carefully. "It feels familiar." Marcus nodded, his gaze drifting to the piano. "That melody," he said softly. "Do you know where it comes from?" Amelia shook her head. "I don't know where I learned it. It's just always been in my head." For a moment, Marcus was silent, his hands clasped behind his back. Then he sighed and gestured to the piano. "Sit with me," he said, moving to the bench. Amelia hesitated but obeyed, perching on the edge of the bench beside him. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play the same melody she had just performed, but with subtle variations, soft flourishes and lingering pauses that gave the piece an almost mournful quality. "How do you know this?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Because I taught it to someone," he said finally. "Someone who meant a great deal to me." "Who?" Amelia pressed, her heart pounding. Marcus turned to face her, his expression both wistful and pained. "Your mother," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Amelia stared at him, struggling to process what he had just said. You knew my mother?" Marcus nodded. "Her name was Clara," he said. "She was one of the most talented violinists I've ever met, but she was more than that. She was my student, my muse, and my friend." Amelia's mind raced with questions. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She died," Marcus said quietly, "in a car accident, along with your father. It was devastating." Amelia felt her chest tighten. "Then, how did Elliot and I—" "You survived," Marcus interrupted gently. "No one knows exactly how. But when the authorities found the wreckage, you and Elliot were gone. They assumed someone had taken you in, but the trail went cold." Amelia sat in stunned silence, her fingers gripping the edge of the bench. "Why didn't you look for us?" she asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "I did," Marcus said, his tone earnest. "For years I searched, but it was as if you had disappeared into thin air. Then, at your performance at the orphanage, I heard that melody, Clara's melody, and I knew it had to be you." The revelation left Amelia reeling. She had spent so long wondering about her past, and now pieces of it were finally coming together. But the answers only raised more questions. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" she asked, her voice sharp. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wasn't sure you were ready," he admitted, "and I didn't want to overwhelm you. But you deserve to know the truth." Amelia stood abruptly, pacing the room. "You should have told me," she said, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "I've spent my whole life not knowing who I am, and you—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "You had the answers all along." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice heavy with regret. "But now that you're here, I want to help you and Elliot. I want to give you the life your parents would have wanted for you." Later that evening, Amelia sat by the window in her room, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. Elliot was asleep in his room, blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside her. She clutched her violin, running her fingers over its worn surface. Her mother had played this. Her mother had taught her this melody, and Marcus had been there through it all. The thought was both comforting and disconcerting. She didn't know how to feel, grateful for the answers or angry for the time lost. As the rain pattered against the glass, Amelia made a silent vow. She would honor her mother's memory, not just by playing the violin, but by uncovering the full truth of their past. No matter how painful it might be, she needed to know who she was, and why fate had brought her to Marcus Donovan's door. The morning after Marcus's revelation dawned crisp and clear, but inside the Donovan estate, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Amelia woke early, her mind still racing with everything Marcus had told her. She dressed quickly and made her way to the library, hoping to find some quiet to process her thoughts. Instead, she found Liam slouched in an armchair with a book open in his lap. His expression was as guarded as ever. "What are you doing here so early?" Liam asked, without looking up. "I could ask you the same thing," Amelia replied, moving toward one of the bookshelves. "Let me guess," Liam said, closing his book with a sharp snap. "You're still basking in the glow of being Dad's new favorite." Amelia froze, her fingers brushing the spines of the books. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been here all of 2 minutes, and he's already treating you like you're the second coming of Mozart," Liam said, his tone laced with bitterness. "Meanwhile, I've been here my whole life, and nothing I do is ever good enough." Amelia turned to face him, her jaw tightening. "Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time working on your music, things would be different." Liam shot to his feet, his eyes blazing. "You don't know anything about me," he snapped. "You don't know what it's like living in his shadow, always being compared to people like you." "People like me?" Amelia repeated, her voice rising. "You don't even know me." "Exactly," Liam said, his voice cutting. "I don't know you, and I don't want to. So why don't you stop pretending like you belong here?" Their argument echoed through the house, drawing Marcus's attention. He appeared in the doorway, his expression stern. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Nothing," Liam muttered, brushing past him and storming out of the room. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I apologize for Liam," he said to Amelia. "He's struggling to adjust." "So am I," Amelia said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "And I didn't ask to be treated like some prodigy." "You're not being treated that way," Marcus said, his tone calm but firm. "You're being given opportunities because you've earned them." Amelia didn't reply. Instead, she turned back to the bookshelf, her fingers trembling slightly. Later that day, Marcus announced that he wanted Amelia and Liam to perform together at an upcoming benefit concert for the local arts foundation. The announcement was met with silence. "You can't be serious," Liam said, his arms crossed. "I'm very serious," Marcus replied. "You both have incredible talent, and this is a chance for you to showcase it. Or for you to show off your newest project," Liam muttered under his breath. "Enough," Marcus said sharply. "This isn't up for debate. You'll rehearse together starting tomorrow." Liam glared at Amelia, his resentment clear, but she refused to back down. "Fine," he said finally, "but don't expect me to make it easy." The first rehearsal was a disaster. Liam arrived late, his irritation palpable, and refused to follow Marcus's instructions. Every time Amelia tried to collaborate, he either ignored her or deliberately played off key to throw her off. "Liam, focus," Marcus said, his patience wearing thin. "I'm trying," Liam shot back, though it was clear he wasn't. Amelia gritted her teeth, her frustration building with each passing moment. Finally, she snapped. "If you don't want to be here, then don't bother showing up." "Believe me, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him," Liam said, jerking his thumb at Marcus. "But I guess I don't have a choice, do I?" "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "Both of you, take a break." After Liam stormed out, Amelia sank onto the piano bench, her shoulders slumping. "This isn't going to work," she said, her voice heavy with defeat. "It will," Marcus said, sitting beside her. "But it's going to take time. Liam, he's not used to sharing the spotlight." "That's no excuse for the way he's acting," Amelia said. "He doesn't even want to try." "He's scared," Marcus said simply. "Scared of being overshadowed, scared of failing. But I know he can rise above it, just like I know you can." Amelia looked at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "Because you both have potential," Marcus said, "and because you're family now, whether you like it or not." Over the next few weeks, Amelia and Liam's rehearsals continued, slowly improving as they began to find common ground. Their initial animosity gave way to grudging respect and eventually moments of genuine collaboration. By the time the benefit concert approached, their duet had transformed into something powerful and moving. On the night of the concert, Marcus watched from the wings as they took the stage together. For the first time, He saw not just two talented musicians, but two young people learning to trust each other and themselves. As the final notes of their performance filled the hall, the audience erupted into applause. Amelia and Liam exchanged a glance, a small smile passing between them. It wasn't a perfect harmony, but it was a start. The echoes of applause from the benefit concert had barely faded before tension began to creep back into the Donovan household. Although the duet performance had been a success, the fragile truce between Amelia and Liam was short-lived. By the time they returned home that evening, the uneasy peace had begun to unravel. Amelia found herself unable to sleep that night. The adrenaline from the concert had left her restless, her mind replaying every note of their performance. She couldn't deny that Liam had played beautifully, but his coldness off stage still stung. Slipping out of bed, she crept downstairs to the music room. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint creak of the old wooden floors beneath her feet. She closed the door softly behind her and picked up her violin, drawing the bow across the strings in a slow, melancholic tune. The music helped ease the knot in her chest, allowing her to release the frustration and confusion she had been holding on to. Unbeknownst to her, Liam was also awake. He had retreated to the library after the concert, nursing a glass of water and staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. The applause from the audience still rang in his ears, but it didn't feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like a reminder of everything he thought he lacked. Hearing the faint strains of violin music, Liam set his glass down and followed the sound. When he reached the music room, he stood in the doorway, watching silently as Amelia played. Her eyes were closed, her movements fluid and precise. For the first time, Liam saw her not as a rival, but as someone entirely absorbed in her craft. "You're good," he said finally, breaking the silence. Startled, Amelia looked up, her bow stilling on the strings. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone wary. "Couldn't sleep," Liam said, stepping into the room. "Neither could you, apparently." Amelia set the violin down and crossed her arms. "If you're here to start another fight, don't bother. I'm not in the mood." Liam sighed and leaned against the piano. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "I just wanted to say you played well tonight." Amelia raised an eyebrow, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks," she said cautiously. "You did too." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension that had defined their relationship since Amelia's arrival seemed to dissipate slightly, replaced by an uneasy understanding. The fragile peace didn't last long. The next morning, Marcus announced that he wanted Amelia and Liam to begin preparing for an audition at a prestigious music academy in Boston. The opportunity was a rare one, and Marcus's connections had secured them a chance to showcase their talents before a panel of renowned judges. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," Marcus said over breakfast. "If you're accepted, it could open doors you've never even dreamed of." Liam's fork clattered against his plate. "Both of us?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief. "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "You'll audition as a duo." Amelia glanced at Liam, whose jaw was set tightly. She could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "I don't need her to make it," Liam said, his voice rising. "I can do this on my own." "That's enough," Marcus said sharply. "This isn't about proving yourself. It's about working together and showcasing your strengths." Liam pushed back his chair and stood abruptly. "Maybe you should just let her do it then," he said bitterly before storming out of the room. Amelia found Liam in the garden later that afternoon, pacing near the pond. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach him, but her frustration outweighed her caution. "What's your problem?" she demanded, crossing her arms as she stepped closer. "My problem?" Liam shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You show up out of nowhere, and suddenly everything revolves around you. My dad barely looks at me anymore because he's too busy playing mentor to his new project." "That's not true," Amelia said, though she felt a pang of guilt. "He's trying to help both of us." "No," Liam said, his voice hard. "He's trying to fix me by comparing me to you." Amelia stared at him, taken aback by the raw emotion in his voice. "This isn't a competition, Liam," she said quietly. "We're both here because we have something to offer. Can't you see that?" Liam turned away, his shoulders tense. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "I'll never be good enough for him." Later that evening, Amelia found herself sitting with Marcus in the library. She had shared the details of her conversation with Liam, hoping he could shed some light on why Liam seemed so determined to push her away. "He's always been hard on himself," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "Even as a child, he felt like he had to live up to impossible standards. I've tried to support him, but—" He trailed off, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "You compare him to me," Amelia said bluntly. Marcus's eyes widened slightly before he sighed. "I don't mean to," he admitted. "But you're right. I've been so focused on nurturing your talent that I've neglected his. It wasn't intentional, but it was wrong." Amelia nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Maybe it's not too late to fix it," she said. Marcus gave her a small smile. "You're right," he said. "It's never too late." The following day, Marcus called Amelia and Liam into the music room. "I owe you both an apology," he began, his tone earnest. "I've been unfair in the way I've handled this, and I want to make it right." Liam crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. "How?" "By giving you both the space to grow," Marcus said. "I'll be here to guide you, but I won't push you to compete against each other. This audition is about working together, not proving who's better." Amelia glanced at Liam, who remained silent but didn't object. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that they might be able to move forward as a team. The tension in the Donovan household lingered after Marcus's apology. While his words had softened the atmosphere, the underlying conflicts between Liam and Amelia remained unresolved. The upcoming audition loomed over them like a storm cloud, pushing both to practice harder, but also widening the emotional gulf between them. Late one evening, Amelia was practicing her violin in the music room. The steady rhythm of her bowing filled the empty house, but her mind was elsewhere. No matter how hard she tried, the notes sounded lifeless, as though her heart wasn't in it. Frustrated, she set the violin down and rubbed her temples. Her thoughts wandered to Liam, who had barely spoken to her since their argument in the garden. Despite their uneasy truce, she could sense his resentment simmering beneath the surface. A knock at the door startled her. It was Martha. Her kind eyes filled with concern. "Have you seen Liam?" she asked. "No," Amelia replied, frowning. "Why?" "He didn't come to dinner," Martha said. "I thought he might be practicing, but the library and music room are empty. Marcus is out for the evening, and I can't find Liam anywhere." Amelia grabbed a flashlight and headed outside, her heart pounding. The garden was shrouded in darkness, the moonlight barely illuminating the paths. She followed the trail to the pond, where she and Liam had often found solace in their separate ways. "Liam?" she called, her voice echoing through the still night. There was no answer, but the faint sound of rustling leaves caught her attention. She turned toward the forest that bordered the estate, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. Her stomach twisted with worry. What if Liam had gone into the woods? Taking a deep breath, Amelia stepped onto the narrow path that led into the trees. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of branches in the wind. Amelia's flashlight beam flickered over twisted roots and fallen leaves as she ventured deeper, calling Liam's name at intervals. Finally, she spotted him. He was sitting on a fallen log near a small clearing, his shoulders hunched and his head bowed. A notebook lay open in his lap, the faint light from the flashlight revealing hastily scribbled music notes. "Liam," Amelia said, relief flooding her voice as she approached. "What are you doing out here?" He didn't look up. "What does it look like?" he muttered. "I'm working." "In the middle of the forest?" she asked, lowering herself onto the log beside him. "You scared Martha half to death." Liam shrugged, his eyes fixed on the notebook. "I needed space," he said simply. "Away from everything." Amelia hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "You know," she said after a moment, "you're not the only one who feels that way." Liam glanced at her, his expression skeptical. "Oh, really? What would you know about it?" "More than you think," Amelia said, her tone firm. "You think it's easy being here, knowing I'm the outsider? Every time you look at me, it's like you're daring me to fail." "I'm not daring you to fail," Liam said, his voice quieter now. "I'm just scared I will." The honesty in his words caught Amelia off guard. For the first time, she saw not the arrogant boy who had pushed her away, but someone burdened by his own insecurities. They sat in silence for a while, the forest enveloping them in its quiet embrace. Eventually, Liam spoke again. "You were right, you know," he said. "This isn't a competition, but it's hard not to feel like it is when I've always felt like I'm not enough." "You are enough," Amelia said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "You're talented, Liam. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, not to me, not to Marcus." Liam looked at her, his defenses lowered for the first time. "Do you really think so?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "Yes," Amelia said, "and if you'd stop pushing me away, we might actually make a great team." By the time they returned to the house, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. Martha was waiting for them on the porch, her worry giving way to relief as she saw them together. "You two gave me quite a scare," she scolded gently, ushering them inside. "Go get some rest before Marcus gets back. I don't want him fretting over this." Amelia and Liam exchanged a small smile as they climbed the stairs to their respective rooms. For the first time since her arrival, Amelia felt a glimmer of hope that things might be different, that they might finally start to understand each other. The next morning, Liam knocked on Amelia's door, holding his notebook of music. "I've been working on something," he said. "I thought, maybe we could try it together?" Amelia smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "I'd like that," she said. As they sat down in the music room, their instruments in hand, the notes flowed between them like a conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time, Amelia felt like they were truly making music together. The breakthrough in Amelia and Liam's relationship brought a newfound energy to the Donovan estate. For the first time, their rehearsals were filled with genuine collaboration. They began to appreciate each other's unique talents, blending their styles into something far greater than they could achieve alone. Even Marcus noticed the change, his quiet pride evident as he watched them work together. But just as harmony was beginning to take root, the shadows of the past resurfaced, threatening to unravel everything. One evening, after a particularly productive rehearsal, Marcus called Amelia into his study. The room was warm and inviting, its walls lined with shelves of books and memorabilia. Marcus sat at his desk, a small box resting in front of him. "I've been meaning to show you this," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "It's something I found while going through some old belongings." Amelia took the seat across from him, her curiosity piqued. Marcus slid the box toward her, his expression unreadable. Inside, Amelia found a collection of photographs, letters, and a small leather-bound journal. Her breath caught as she picked up one of the photos. A picture of a young woman holding a violin, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. "That's your mother, Clara," Marcus said softly. The journal belonged to her. Amelia traced the edges of the photograph with trembling fingers. The woman in the picture looked so familiar, yet so distant, like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. "She was extraordinary," Marcus continued, "not just as a musician, but as a person. She had this way of making everyone around her feel seen, like they mattered." Amelia looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me about her sooner?" Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't know if you were ready," he admitted. "Your mother's story is complicated, but you deserve to know the truth." Over the next hour, Marcus recounted his memories of Clara. She had been his student, a prodigy with an innate talent for music. Their relationship had started as mentor and pupil, but deepened into a close friendship. Marcus admitted that he had fallen in love with her, but Clara's heart had belonged to someone else, a fellow musician named Daniel. "They were perfect for each other," Marcus said, his voice tinged with both sadness and admiration. "Their love was the kind you read about in novels, and when they had you and Elliot, it was like their family was complete." Amelia listened intently, her emotions swirling as she tried to piece together the fragments of her past. "What happened to them?" she asked, dreading the answer. Marcus hesitated, his gaze dropping to the desk. "There was an accident," he said finally. "A car crash. Clara and Daniel didn't survive." Amelia felt a lump rise in her throat. "And Elliot and I?" "You were found near the wreckage," Marcus said. "No one knows how you got out of the car, or how you ended up so far from the crash site. By the time the authorities arrived, you were gone. It was as if you'd vanished into thin air." Amelia's mind reeled as she tried to process the information. "Why didn't anyone come for us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They tried," Marcus said gently, "but there were no immediate family members to take you in, and the trail went cold. I searched for years, Amelia. I never stopped looking. And then, when I heard you play at the orphanage, I knew I'd found you." As Marcus finished his story, Amelia sat in stunned silence, the weight of her family's history pressing down on her. She glanced at the journal, her fingers hovering over its worn cover. "May I?" she asked. "Of course," Marcus said. "It's yours." Amelia opened the journal carefully, the pages filled with Clara's elegant handwriting. The entries were a mix of musical notations, personal reflections, and letters addressed to her children, letters she had never been able to deliver. One entry in particular caught Amelia's eye. It was dated a few weeks before the accident. "To my dear Amelia and Elliot, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. But please know that you were the greatest joy of my life. Your father and I loved you more than words can express, and we will always be with you, in your hearts, in your music, and in every note you play. Never stop chasing your dreams, my loves. You were born to create beauty in this world." Tears blurred Amelia's vision as she read the words. For the first time, she felt a tangible connection to the parents she had lost, a connection that transcended time and tragedy. Later that night, Amelia shared the story with Elliot. The young boy listened quietly, his wide eyes brimming with emotion. "Do you think they'd be proud of us?" he asked. Amelia pulled him into a hug, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know they would," she said, "and we're going to make sure their legacy lives on." Elliot nodded, clutching the photo of their mother tightly. "I'll never forget them," he said softly. The revelations brought a new sense of purpose to Amelia's music. She poured her emotions into every note, determined to honor her parents' memory. Liam, too, seemed changed by the stories, his own walls beginning to crumble as he watched Amelia grapple with her past. Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Their journey was just beginning, and the music that had brought them together would guide them through whatever lay ahead. The revelation about Amelia and Elliot's parents had a profound effect on everyone in the Donovan household. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet reminder of the past he could never change, but also a source of renewed purpose. For Amelia, it became the foundation for her growing confidence as both a musician and a person. And for Liam, it was a turning point, an opportunity to reevaluate his own insecurities and redefine his relationship with his father, Amelia, and himself. The household dynamic shifted in the weeks following Marcus's disclosure. Morning rehearsals became more collaborative as Amelia and Liam found a rhythm in their partnership. Elliot, inspired by Amelia's journey, spent more time sketching and painting, his vibrant creations filling the walls of the estate. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Marcus made an announcement. "I've decided to enter you both into the National Young Musicians Competition," he said, looking at Amelia and Liam. "It's one of the most prestigious contests in the country, and I believe you're ready." Amelia's eyes widened. "The National Young Musicians Competition?" she repeated. "That's huge." "It is," Marcus said with a nod, "but I have no doubt that the two of you can rise to the occasion." Liam leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Together?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Yes," Marcus replied, "as a duet." The tension that had lingered between them surfaced briefly, but this time it was tempered by a shared sense of responsibility. They both knew the stakes were high, not just for their music, but for their evolving relationship as collaborators. The days leading up to the competition were grueling. Marcus pushed Amelia and Liam harder than ever, refining every detail of their performance. There were moments of friction, especially when their creative visions clashed, but these were often resolved with compromise and a growing mutual respect. One afternoon, as they practiced in the music room, Amelia noticed something different about Liam. His usual defensiveness had softened, replaced by a quiet determination. "You've been working on that part," she said, gesturing to the complex solo he had just played flawlessly. Liam shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Figured I'd better keep up with you." Amelia laughed. "You're doing more than keeping up," she said. "You're leading." Liam met her gaze, and for the first time, Amelia saw pride instead of resentment. "Thanks," he said simply. Meanwhile, Elliot had been spending more time exploring the estate's extensive attic, where boxes of forgotten treasures lay gathering dust. One day, he stumbled upon an old trunk filled with sheet music. Among the pages was a piece labeled Clara's Lullaby. Excited, Elliot brought the sheet music to Amelia. "Look what I found," he said, his face glowing with excitement. Amelia examined the music, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized her mother's handwriting. "This was hers," she whispered, tracing the notes with her fingers. Marcus, who had entered the room to check on their progress, froze when he saw the sheet music. "I haven't seen that in years," he said softly. "She wrote it for you and Elliot." The discovery of the lullaby added a new layer to Amelia and Liam's performance. They decided to incorporate it into their competition piece, using its hauntingly beautiful melody as the emotional centerpiece of their duet. As the competition approached, the Donovan household became a hive of activity. Martha ensured everyone was well fed and rested, while Marcus fine-tuned every aspect of their performance. Even Elliot contributed, creating a series of sketches inspired by the lullaby that were displayed in the estate's gallery. The night before the competition, the family gathered in the living room for a rare moment of relaxation. Marcus brought out an old photo album, sharing stories about Clara and Daniel that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. "You have their spirit," Marcus said to Amelia and Elliot, his voice filled with emotion. "And their talent. Never doubt that." The day of the competition arrived, and the family traveled to Boston for the event. The concert hall was grand and intimidating, filled with musicians from across the country. Amelia and Liam were nervous, but ready, their weeks of preparation giving them the confidence they needed to succeed. As they took the stage, the spotlight shone down on them, and the audience fell silent. Amelia took a deep breath, her violin poised, while Liam's fingers hovered over the piano keys. The opening notes of Clara's lullaby filled the air, delicate and mournful, drawing the audience into their world. The performance was flawless. Amelia and Liam's music was not just technically perfect, but deeply emotional, telling a story of loss, resilience, and hope. When the final note faded, the hall erupted into applause, the sound filling every corner of the space. Backstage, Marcus hugged them both, his pride evident. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happens, you've already won." The competition marked a turning point for everyone. Amelia and Liam's relationship had transformed from rivalry to partnership, and Elliot had found his own path as an artist. Marcus, too, had begun to heal from the pain of the past, finding solace in the family they had built together. As they drove back to the estate that evening, the future felt brighter than ever. For the first time, the Donovan household was not just a house, but a home, a place where music, love, and hope could flourish. Thank you for joining me for this story. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel to stay updated on the heartfelt stories I'm passionate about sharing. Your support means the world to me and motivates me to keep creating. I'm truly grateful to have you on this journey with me.